My name is Jason, and this is Just Watches. Okay, today we have a Seiko diver that I was very interested in, but never acquired because I thought it would be too big. This is the Seiko SPB079 that was generously lent into the channel by Mr. X. Speaking of generosity towards the channel, I wanted to show off this amazing print of my logo that was made for me by WatchOut247 on Instagram. It has this dynamic red coloring, and I absolutely love it. Now, before we get to the review, if you're enjoying the contents of this channel, I invite you to subscribe, and if you're enjoying the contents of this individual video, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much. So this watch is getting a little trickier to find now, but they do have them on Creation Watches new for $725. And then if you look on eBay, you can find them used floating around $500. So the case is 43.5 millimeters in diameter, 50 millimeters lug to lug, but the end lengths do extend past the end of the lugs, making the true lug to lug 53.5 millimeters. It's 13 millimeters thick and then has a 20 millimeter lug width opening. Now sized up for my wrist, it weighs in at 170 grams. So while this case is large, it does benefit from that sweet Seiko case magic, and I actually think I can pull it off on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. Now technically the end lengths do extend past the edges of my wrist, but there's a gentle curve to the case, the lugs, and also the end lengths that help mitigate this. Now, this is the Marine Master style case, and I think of all the Seiko dive cases, this is my favorite. There's something about the combination of the gentle curve of the case with those large, high polished shoulders paired with angular lugs. It's bulky but elegant at the same time, and then that 4 o'clock crown gives it that Seiko diver charm. Now, the finishing here is quite good, much better than your entry level like SKX, but not quite as refined as the newer SPB187, which I will compare this watch to later in this video. Now, despite being 13 millimeters thick on paper, it feels thinner on the wrist, but it is a heavy watch at 170 grams, so keep that in mind if you are considering this one. Finally, the case and bracelet are all treated with DiaShield, which in my experience does a decent job at preventing scratches. The stock bracelet uses solid end links. There's a touch of play between the end link and the head of the watch, but nothing you'll notice while it's on your wrist. The bracelet starts at 20 millimeters and then tapers down to 18 millimeters before jumping back up to 20 millimeters at the clasp. Now, I love the links on this bracelet. The theme of curves and sharp angles that is present in the case is continued into the bracelet. The outer links are rounded while the inner links are angular. The tops of all the inner links are brushed, but then those angle sides are high polish and they just catch a little bit of light. And then the outer links are fully brushed, but the sides of the outer links are high polish. Now, the clasp is pretty standard Seiko affair, but the scissor is fully milled. Now, this clasp does have that large diver extension, which I dislike, but I understand why they're including that on an ISO certified dive watch. Now, it has 4 micro positions, which should help you get a good fit, and then sizing is accomplished with the dreaded Seiko pin and collar system, although if you want help with that, I have a video that you can watch and I'll post a link in the upper right hand corner. Now, bracelets were never really Seiko's strong suit, but I actually don't mind this stock one. The screw-in Caseback is going to help provide 200 meters of water resistance and has the familiar and charming Seiko wave in high polish. Now, this watch is powered by the Seiko 6R15. That's a hacking, hand-winding 21,600 vibration per hour movement with a slightly better than the entry-level 50-hour power reserve and a stated accuracy of -15 to +25 seconds a day, but I usually find these run closer to ±10 seconds a day. It also features a quick set date. And then this particular one is +13 seconds a day in the dial-up position. The beat error is a little high, but not so high that I think you couldn't just adjust that out. And then crown up, we're getting about -8 seconds a day, similar beat error. The 7mm screw-down crown is sadly unsigned, something Seiko seems to have abandoned at this price point. However, the knurling is good, and the ample size in combination with the lack of crown girds makes it very easy to operate this watch via this crown. The rethreading action is fine, if ever slightly so gravelly, which is kind of common on Seikos. So Seiko actually used a sapphire crystal on this one as opposed to hardlex, which is something they are getting better about. Now, it's completely flush with the bezel and lacks any noticeable bevel around the edge. There's also a great application of anti-reflective coating on the inner surface of the crystal, which is really going to help you appreciate that dial. The 120 click unidirectional bezel has a nice coin edge. The action is very typical of Seiko, which is kind of a combination of mushy and clicky, and then this one actually lines up pretty close to perfectly. The insert on this bezel is absolutely gorgeous. I believe it is a coated steel insert. It's a really dark blue that even sometimes appears black, but under bright light changes into a beautiful reflective inky blue. Starting at the edge of the dial, we have a black chapter ring with large dashes for the hours and thinner dashes for the minutes. The dial itself is actually a matte black, however in many lighting conditions it almost appears glossy, which is a really cool effect. Seiko sits at 12, and then we have the triple line of the Prospex X, Automatic, and Divers 200 meter residing at 6. The frame date window resides at 3. The applied indices are edged in high polish and filled with lume. Overall, the dial is super legible, and I love how inky black the dial can appear at times. Now, before I experienced this watch in person, I wasn't a fan of the giant arrow hour hand. This watch was inspired by Seiko divers from the late 1960s, and I felt like this giant hour hand just sort of modernized it a bit too much and made it look like the Seiko monster. However, in practice, I actually love the handset. The large arrow hour hand actually fits the overall size of the dial, and then the minute hand is very long. It even comes to a nice point right at the edge of the chapter ring. The finish on the hour hand and minute hand is all brushed. The hands are all flat, but with the large area of lume, the watch is legible with these hands in all lighting conditions. And then finally, the second hand has that fun lollipop counterbalance. And as for lume, what do you expect? It's Seiko Lume Bright. It's super bright, super responsive, lasts a long time, and we have a ton of surface area here. And here it is on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. So this is a big watch, but I do think I'm barely able to pull it off. Obviously, this depends on your preference, but that Seiko case magic does make this one quite wearable. And then despite being 13 millimeters thick, I do not think it looks that thick on wrist. Now, this watch is very similar to the newer and slightly smaller SPB187. The finishing on the 187 is slightly more refined, but it also has a higher MSRP, so that isn't really surprising. The bracelets are almost identical, except the 187 does use the newer clasp style. Now, on the 187, I prefer the handset, both because I love the multi-finished hands that use brushing and polishing, but I also love that stoplight style second hand tip. And then I think the bezel action on the 187 is also slightly more refined. For the older 079, the date window is just way better executed with a really nice frame. The date window on the 187 seems so lazy. It's just an unadorned hole in the dial that they didn't even bother to bevel the edge of. The only real difference in the movements is the power reserve, which is going to be longer in the 187. However, all in all, I really like both of these watches a lot. I think it might just come down to price, and if you can find one of the older ones, and then the size difference based on your preference. Finally, if you want to see my full review of the SPB187, I will link it in the upper right hand corner now. So for pros and cons, well, this is a really nice watch that is a step up from your entry-level Seikos. I love that we have a sapphire crystal with really good AR coating here. Also, this bezel is gorgeous, and the blue and black combination is really stunning. Finally, this watch is ultra legible, and then I'm just a huge fan of this Marine Master style case. As for cons, the bezel action doesn't feel that much different from an entry-level Seiko, and I would like to have it a bit more refined at this higher tier. Second, if you're just chasing pure specs, the new King versions of the Samurai and the Turtle are less, but also have things like sapphire crystals and ceramic bezels. Finally, I know an ISO certified dive watch is gonna have a diver's extension. I just wish there was a way they could have executed it a little bit better. The way they do it here makes the clasp just so much bigger, and I find it slightly inelegant. As for comparables, as I mentioned as one of the cons, Seiko actually has started offering specs like sapphire crystals, ceramic bezels, and some of the King line, which can be easily obtained for a little north of $400. So if you want a similar set of specs for a lot less, you can consider a King Samurai or a King Turtle. At the risk of mentioning it every review, I always recommend Steinhardt around this price point as well. And then for a bit more, you could get any of the new modern Seiko divers, such as the slightly smaller SPB187 we compared this watch to, or any of the other variants such as the Willard or the Slim Willard. So there you have it, the Seiko SPB079. What do you think about this watch? Let me know in the comments section below. As always, if you're enjoying the contents of this channel, I invite you to subscribe, and if you like the contents of this individual video, please give it a thumbs up. That's all for this time. My name is Jason, and you've been watching Just Watches.